Without further ado, I want to introduce you to James Burk. Our People of Science segment will dive into his STEM origin stories and then talk about the Mars Society and everything to do with Mars and space. Enjoy. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody, to Today in Space. This week, we have a special guest, James Burk. We're going to be having a segment of People of Science. We're going to learn about what got James into this and where he's become this contributing member of the Mars Society. We're going to learn a little bit about the history of the Mars Society and where it's been, where it's going, and what's new and what we should be looking into. So, James, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
It's an honor. So let's start with your STEM origin story. Where did this passion for science and Mars and all that stuff start?
You know, it's as long as I can remember, I was just really interested in space. I think the earliest memory I have of really my love for space was how excited I got when I went to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. I think I was about 8 years old.
Oh, man.
And just seeing the spacecraft there, you know, even like the Wright Flyer and the Bell X-1 that Chuck Yeager flew. I was just so passionate about that, even that young. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go into the Air Force and fly fighter planes and eventually fly space planes like Buck Rogers.
Cool.
And I still have, like, when I went on that trip, we went to the gift store there at the Air and Space Museum, and my mom said, you know, what do you want to get? I'll get you one thing. And I picked out this book, and it's called the Omni Space Almanac.
Oh, wow.
It was in 1984 that this was published, and I just devoured this book. I mean, I read this book cover to cover many times, and in it, it has project timetables for when we're going to go settle the moon and go to Mars and settle the solar system, you know. And they're all from the vantage point of the early 80s when things were maybe going a little faster than they ended up going. So I always kind of look back at that. I'm like, 1990, that's when we should be going to Mars. Why didn't it happen? So another thing that was really interesting that happened to me, I was in 3rd grade in Orlando, Florida, when Challenger happened. And we were on recess, and in Orlando, Florida, it's not that far from the Cape, so you can actually see shuttles launch in the sky from there. And so we saw the smoke, and everyone was like, thought it was normal. It was like, oh, the shuttle took off, and it was like a regular thing at that point for people in Florida. We'd hear sonic booms all the time. It was just not a big deal, right?
Right.
So, I like kind of was like, oh, the smoke looks a little different. It kind of has this V.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if something happened. And then it was so crazy because my teacher had me go get the radio. I think she caught wind that something had happened. And so I'm like 3rd grade carrying the radio into my classroom, and they literally are saying the Challenger had exploded, apparently. And so it was this whole kind of moment that was very real. To everyone in my generation, we all remember that, but it was so weird that, like, I was the one that brought that news to my classroom.
I got goosebumps thinking about it, man. That's intense. Wow. And to not understate this at all, like the shuttle is such a big, and those disasters, like there's such a big nexus point for everything that's happened with space. Those timetables being off. I mean, like it's now that we're getting humans to start flying even to just to the edge of space, it's this weird, like, emotional ride. I mean, it's not the shuttle, which I thought it would be related to the shuttle. But now that even just a trip into 0G is still like an emotional thing, which is wild to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the third story I want to briefly tell is when I was in college, Mars Pathfinder happened. And that had a transformative effect on me. I was a young man. I was about to graduate from University of Florida, and I was just glued to CNN and C-SPAN when that mission was happening. I watched every moment of the press conferences. I went on the website. The web was very early then in 1996 and 1997.
Yeah.
But I had a computer, you know, and I was on the web constantly. And I must, you know, they said the Mars Pathfinder website had the most hits ever. I'm sure half of them were me.
Wow.
But that was a huge deal. And later on in life, I've gotten to meet a lot of the people that worked on that mission, like Rob Manning, who
Wow,
was the EDL lead. I just talked to him at the conference, Mars Society conference, a couple years ago. That was a huge deal to meet
that's
him.
amazing.
Now
So
he's the
that,
chief scientist at JPL. So
yeah. So you've had quite the journey to get to this point now with Mars
absolutely.
Society. Is the Mars Society kind of like a great way for you to just experience all the things that you just were in love with growing up as a kid?
Absolutely. I'm
Mm,
living my dreams. I really am.
yeah,
So my journey with the Mars Society started when I read this book, The Case for Mars. And this is the actual copy I read.
got mine.
This is the original back in the
That's
mid 90s.
awesome.
It was published. And I had just graduated college. I went off to work at Microsoft here in Seattle. And so
Mm,
my wife and I were driving cross country to start my new job. And that was the book I read in the car.
oh wow.
And when we got to Seattle, in the months after that, the Mars Society was being organized in
Mm,
August of '98 was our first conference. And so, a few months later, I'm part of the Mars Society, and the guy that wrote the book, Dr. Robert Zubrin, is literally calling me on my desk line at Microsoft. Hey James, can you help me get a meeting with Bill Gates to talk about a Mars mission,
oh
him
man.
funding a Mars mission or him funding some of our activities. So it was very kind of, they threw me right in the deep end at the Mars Society. I was an early volunteer, and now I'm the director of IT. That's a position I've been in for 10 years now. But it's been quite an experience to be part of that organization. There's been so
Mm.
many great things I've gotten to do and people I've gotten to meet because of that.
That's so awesome to hear. One of the things that we try and do here on the podcast is like introduce people to all the different ways that you can get involved in space. For me, growing up, it was even a shock that you could even work on the space shuttle. Like that was a job you could get. Um, but it's so interesting how little you actually know for a lot of people going into aerospace or anything space related. Like, how do you get places? So your story's I think amazing because like it's just another pathway to get really involved. I think there's a misconception that you have to do the traditional engineering route, which in many cases, I mean, you're behind the desk. You're never going to be talking with these people that you've been able to work with. It's a small group that gets to do.